In my video about the coming-of-age adventure genre, I talked about how almost exclusively it was about groups of boys, and kind of posed at the end the question of what could it look like if it was a group of girls instead. In this video I want to take that thought experiment to its logical conclusion, using Stranger Things as an example, to show what swapping genders can teach us about the way we view gender and stereotypes, and the way in which we might be enforcing or subverting them through the media that we make and consume. So first of all, let's take the character of Will Byers. When we look at Will, we see a character who is very clearly queer-coded.
Look, he's not like you, Hopper. He's not like me. He's not like most. He's a sensitive kid. Lonnie used to say he was queer, called him a fag.
Is he?
He's missing!
Whether or not the character is actually gay is sort of beside the point. These are markers of sexuality that the characters are picking up on and that we, the audience, are already familiar with. If we directly swap the gender of Will Byers and make her Wilma Byers, for example, that queerness disappears. A feminine or sensitive boy might be read as queer, but the same in a girl would probably be a kind of stereotypical ideal. She wouldn't be read as queer at all. So now we have to make a decision. Do we want to preserve those elements of the character, the softness, sensitivity, artistic sensibilities, or do we want to preserve the subtextual meaning, the slightly deeper reading underneath? Because in this situation, those two can't really exist at the same time. And even then, if we say, well, we want to keep the idea of queerness, we want to have a look at this outsider character, someone who's different, someone who is going outside the expected norms at the time, that might not translate directly with the gender being swapped. For example, if we were to say, well, we're going to use stereotypes of queer women, we're going to have a girl who is very rough and tumble, very masculine, she might not actually be read as queer either. She's much more likely to be read as a tomboy, like the character of Max in Stranger Things.
She's incredible.
She's Mad Max.
The tension between a direct gender swap that's very plain and simple and one that has to work to preserve the subtext or deeper meaning is always going to be unavoidable when we have so many gendered stereotypes and assumptions which are present in our society, and a lot of them are used in media as shortcuts. A character who might be revolutionary as one gender actually becomes pretty cliche when you swap that gender around. And when we look at it from an intersectional perspective, it becomes even more complex. For example, if you were to have a straight woman in a Disney film, it might be revolutionary to have her not end up with a romantic partner at the end of the film, to be independent, to have a storyline which goes outside of romance. However, if you had a gay character in a Disney movie, it would be much more revolutionary to have them have a happy ending with a romantic partner. So in that way, using gender swapping in order to try and be more progressive actually might have a counter effect. Swapping the gender of an existing character can also throw up stereotypes or absurdities. Let's look at swapping the character of 11 so that she's a boy instead.
Wow. She looks pretty. Good. You look pretty good. Pretty. Good.
Would 11's preoccupation with being pretty come off as absurd if it was a boy? And is it just because boys aren't meant to be pretty, or is it actually absurd when we really think about it for a child of any gender who has had no contact with the outside world apart from adults who have been abusing them to immediately be fixated on their physical appearance when they leave that space? We can also see this in the presentation of Will's mother as a hysterical mum and of Hopper as an angry dad figure. What happens to our view of the morality of these characters when we swap their genders? If Hopper becomes a hysterical father, then does that mean that he becomes feminized? Do we lose some respect for him? And similarly, if Mrs. Byers becomes angry, does she need to be more caring? Does she need to be more nurturing for her to be a good mother? Looking critically at gender swapping is not just the PC Patrol trying to make everything about women. It can actually produce more variance and more depth in characters of all genders. We might get to see more emotionally articulate men on screen and more female villains who aren't sexy seductresses or crazy psychotic bitches. Gender swapping as an exercise ultimately is a really good way of looking at the world building, what kind of society has been created on screen. On a very simple level, you can take stock of how many male versus how many female characters are there in your piece. And not just in your main cast, look at your crowd scenes, look at who is in the different professions that you're portraying. If we look at the split of men and women in crowd scenes in film in general, for example, looking about an 80-20 split, and this is something which becomes a lot more visible when you swap it around. We're so used to this number of men versus women within a crowd scene that it's not even something that most of us pick up on. But suddenly, when there's an overwhelming amount of women, it becomes much more obvious. We can also see more clearly how a fictional world that's been built up really feeds into our pre-existing ideas about morality. For example, if we look at Nancy's character.
Nancy! Gotta get that off there before we open up. I can't believe it. Jesus.
Big chunks of Nancy's story are massively preoccupied with thinking about the guilt and shame and dangers of sexuality in a way that none of the boys that she's being sexual with seem to grapple with. It also allows us to question genres that we say that we can't gender swap. So war movies, for example. Maybe it doesn't make sense to have everyone in the trenches in World War I suddenly be a woman, but it should make us question why we aren't telling the stories of the women who were in the world at that time. Women didn't just disappear while that was happening. Where are our stories about the factories, about the home front, about the nurses? It allows us to question where women are in history. So what do you think? Are there some films or TV shows that you think would actually be improved by gender swapping? Tell me about it in the comments. If you'd like to help support me make these videos, I'm going to leave a link to my Patreon in the description, along with all my social media, so you can find me all over the internet. And until I see you next time, bye.